As the sun dipped low over the wide, muddy ribbon of the Mississippi, the town of Willow Creek seemed to pause in the soft breath of dusk. The wind rustled gently through the tall grass lining the levee, cicadas buzzed in the humid summer air, and somewhere, a screen door creaked open and shut. Life moved slowly here. People waved to each other from porches, and kids still rode their bikes down dusty roads till the fireflies came out. In a place where not much changed, one quiet act of courage would set in motion a story that would ripple across time. Eli was only 9 years old. Back then, skinny black boy with sharp eyes and bare feet hardened by gravel roads. He lived with his mother, Ruth, in a tiny weather-worn house at the edge of town, where laundry hung like flags of resilience on a crooked line out back. Ruth worked double shifts as a cleaner at the local diner and at the care home across the county line. She never complained. Instead, she'd tell Eli the same thing every night before bed. We ain't got much, baby, but what we do have is heart. And heart goes farther than money ever will. That day, Eli was flying his homemade kita, ragged thing made from old grocery bags and to sticks on the levee above the river. The kite danced and dipped, tugging gently in the orange breeze of sunset. Eli smiled, squinting up into the sky, a rare moment of joy on an otherwise hard day. Then suddenly, a splasher, loud, unnatural splash cut through the peace. Eli turned sharply. Down by the water, a man was flailing, gasping, struggling to stay afloat. His suit jacket ballooned. In the current, he cried out once, then again, but there was no one else around. No hesitation, no second guessing. Eli dropped his kite, scrambled down the embankment, and dove into the river. The water was colder than he expected, darker, deeper. His arm sliced through it like a blade too small for the task, but he kept swimming. He grabbed the man's collar, kicked hard, and pulled with every ounce of the strength he didn't know he had. His chest burned, his legs screamed, but inch by inch, he got them to the shore. By the time they collapsed onto the muddy bank, Eli could barely lift his head. The man was coughing, choking, his face pale but alive. A few moments later, another man, a chauffeur in a black car, came, running, panicked. "Mr. Richard, oh God, are you all right?" He barely glanced at Eli before lifting the older man into the back of the car. The door slammed shut, the engine roared, and just like that, they were gone. Eli sat alone on the bank, soaked to the bone, his chest heaving. No thank you, no name, no one even asked who he was. Just the hum of the engine fading into the twilight and the silence of the river returning. He stared after them for a long time, then picked up his kite string from the weeds. The kite had blown away. It didn't matter. He never told his mother. He didn't expect a reward. In his heart, he simply hoped the man was all right. And as he trudged home through the darkening field, he thought to himself, maybe that's all that matters. But the universe somewhere in its great mystery had taken note. Some acts echo louder than others. Some ripple for years before they find their way back. And though Eli had no way of knowing it then, that single moment, the dive, the choice, the silence afterward, had changed the course of his life forever. And so began a journey, not of instant miracles or lucky breaks, but of long nights, empty stomachs, hard choices, and an unshakable belief that doing the right thing, no matter how small, was always worth it. That belief would carry him through storms he hadn't yet seen. But before we go there, let's look closer at the world Eli was trying to survive in, and the boy who refused to let it break him. Eli didn't grow up with much, not toys, not comfort, not even certainty about dinner some nights. But he did grow up with grit. And in Willow Creek, that meant more than gold. Their house stood on cinder blocks at the end of a gravel road, where the porch creaked louder than the welcome mat could promise. The roof leaked when it rained, and the heater groaned like an old man with a sore back. But it was home. Inside, Ruth held it all together with sheer will, patching holes, stretching groceries, and taping up report cards on the fridge like trophies. She never let poverty define them. "We're broke, not broken," she'd whisper, brushing Eli's hair with fingers worn from scrubbing floors. Her strength wasn't loud. It was quiet and constant, the kind that holds a family together like glue no one sees. But even strength has limits. Eli noticed early on that life asked more of him than it did other kids. His shoes had holes before the school year was half over. His backpack was a hand-me-down of a hand-me-down, its zipper stuck and its straps frayed. But he never asked for new things. Instead, he woke early to help his mom with chores, walked to school with his lunch bag empty more often than not, and smiled like it was enough. Other kids noticed. Some mocked him, called him trash boy, or made jokes about his clothes. Eli said nothing. He didn't have time to fight back. Not when he knew there was only one fight that mattered, the one against the future he was handed, and that fight was going to be long. By the time he was 14, he'd already started working weekends. First washing dishes at Joe's Grill, then mowing lawns for the neighbors, who used to pretend not to see him. Later, bagging groceries. In the next town over, catching the 6 a.m. bus with the field hands and line cooks. He came home exhausted, his hands blistered and his feet sore, but with a pride no one could steal. Every dollar he earned, he gave to his mom or tucked under the mattress for college. No video games, no movies, just the quiet satisfaction of not giving up. There were nights Eli went to bed hungry, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, wondering how the world could be so unfair to those who tried the hardest. But he never blamed anyone, not God, not his mother, not even the world. He just pushed harder. In school, he kept his head down and his grades high. A teacher once asked him why he always sat in the front, always turned in his homework early. Eli just shrugged. Because I got plans, he said. No swagger, no ego, just fire behind his eyes. He believed that education was the only road out, and he was going to walk it barefoot if he had to. And still, there were moments of loneliness no effort could erase. On cold days, he watched fathers pick their kids up in warm trucks. On holidays, when his classmates brought stories of road trips and dinners with cousins, Eli just smiled and said, "We had a quiet one." He never mentioned that it was just him and his mom, sharing a peanut butter sandwich, pretending the heater worked. But silence was Eli's superpower. He didn't complain, he didn't explain, he endured. And that endurance carved something into his soul that no wealth could replicate. Resilience. He knew pain intimately, but he didn't let it harden him. Instead, it softened him toward others. He held the door for strangers. He helped younger kids with homework. He gave away half his sandwich when someone else forgot theirs. Because in his world, kindness wasn't something you showed off, it was something you passed down. The boy who saved a stranger by the river was the same boy who carried groceries for Mrs. Tompkins down the block, who volunteered to stack chairs after school events, who gave everything without expecting anything. And yet, the world didn't reward him right away. The grind got harder, the stakes got higher. As high school graduation loomed, so did a question heavier than any backpack. How was he going to pay for college? His mother did all she could overtime, double shifts, skipped meals. But the numbers didn't lie. Tuition was a mountain, and they didn't have shoes for the climb. But Eli didn't panic. He applied for scholarships, wrote essays late into the night, filled out forms with hands trembling from fatigue. And when that letter came, the one with the seal of a university hundreds of miles away, he held it to his chest like it was the first time life said, "You matter." It wasn't the end of struggle. It was the start of a harder one. He would leave everything he knew behind: his mother, his town, his river, and head toward a city that didn't care about kites or kindness. But as he packed his thrift store suitcase and kissed his mother goodbye at the bus stop, there was no fear in his eyes, just that same quiet fire. Because Eli wasn't just chasing a dream. He was running toward the life he believed people like him deserved, and the city it would test him, break him down, push him to his limits. But Eli didn't know how to quit. He only knew how to survive. And as the bus pulled away from Willow Creek, he stared out the window at the horizon, not knowing that soon, the past he'd long forgotten would come roaring back into his life in the most unexpected way. The bus ride to Houston was long, hot, and smelled faintly of diesel and old dreams. Eli sat by the window, watching the flat Louisiana fields roll into Texas highways, clutching a duffel bag that carried all he owned: 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, a Bible his mother gave him, and a folder with one precious piece of paper: his college acceptance letter. He didn't cry when he left Willow Creek, not when his mom hugged him tight and whispered, "Make this count," not when the Greyhound pulled out of the station. But somewhere between Lafayette and Beaumont, with the sun dipping low and unfamiliar lights blinking on in the distance, a lump rose in his throat. He wasn't scared, just alone. The university campus was massive. Brick buildings, glass towers, people everywhere with earbuds, coffee cups, laptops tucked under their arms. Eli felt like he'd stepped into another world, a world where no one knew about leaky roofs or skipped dinners, where people ordered food they couldn't finish and threw away, textbooks that cost more than his mother's weekly paycheck. He found his way to student housing, cramped dorm room with tile floors and one narrow window that overlooked a parking lot. His roommate, Jackson, came from Atlanta. wore sneakers that probably cost more than Eli's entire wardrobe, and talked about weekend trips to Austin like they were errands. They were polite to each other, but worlds apart. Eli unpacked in silence. He lined up his thrift store clothes in the tiny closet and taped his mother's photo beside his desk. "Keep your head up," she'd said. "Remember who you are." He would. He had to. The first few weeks were brutal. The classes weren't the problem. Mike could handle books. What he couldn't handle was the weight of invisibility. No one knew him. No one noticed him. He sat in lecture halls with 300 students, took notes diligently, raised his hand with answers no one heard. At night, he studied in the library until it closed, too afraid to fall behind. He wasn't just trying to pass, he was trying to prove he belonged. But belonging came at a cost. The scholarship covered tuition, but not everything else. Meals, books, laundry, transportation. It added up fast. After 2 weeks, his wallet was down to $23. His stomach growled more often than not, and he learned to ration instant noodles like currency. He took free granola bars from orientation tables and stashed fruit from the dining hall when no one was looking. Pride is hard to chew when you're hungry, but Eli had learned a long time ago. You swallow it if you must. Eventually, he found work waiting tables at a local diner 3 nights a week and mopping floors at a gas station on weekends. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the lights on and the hunger at bay. There were days when he'd go straight from a 3-hour seminar to a 10-hour shift without a break. His feet ached. His eyes burned, but he never missed a class. Never turned in an assignment late. Some nights he'd fall asleep in his clothes, cheek pressed against a textbook, alarms set in layers just to make sure he didn't miss the 7 a.m. lecture. He started carrying his toothbrush in his backpack because he was never sure when or where he'd next find time to go home. There were setbacks, too. One night, walking back from work, 3 boys cornered him behind the gas station. "Got any tips, college boy?" One of them sneered, before snatching his backpack and shoving him against a fence. They didn't take much, just $20, and his class notes, but the message lingered. The city didn't care who you were, or where you were headed. Eli didn't fight back. He didn't report it. He just walked home, face bloodied, fists clenched, breathing slow and even. That night, he washed his face in the dorm sink, looked at himself in the mirror, and whispered, "They don't get to stop me," because giving up was never an option. Not after what his mama gave up for him. Not after all the nights she skipped dinner so he could eat. Not after all the times she patched his jeans by hand and told him, "You got a mind, baby. Use it like a weapon." So he did. Every day, Eli chipped away at the wall the world had built between him and everything he dreamed of. One quiz, one paycheck, one quiet win at a time. He wasn't the loudest. He wasn't the most connected, but he was still standing, and sometimes that's more than enough. The city tried to humble him, but all it did was sharpen him. And just when he thought life had forgotten that moment by the river, when a boy with nothing saved a man with everything, destiny stirred again. It came one night, just like any other rain, slicking the roads, steam rising from manhole covers, and Eli behind the wheel of a borrowed car, working a late shift for a rideshare app. He didn't know it yet, but his next passenger wasn't just a fare. He was a ghost from the past, a name long forgotten, and the key to everything Eli never dared hope for. The rain had been falling since dusk, soft and steady, painting the Houston streets in a glossy sheen of orange and silver. Eli sat behind the wheel of a faded sedan that rattled slightly when idling, his hoodie pulled up, the heater humming low. It was just another Thursday night, another late shift, another handful of rides to scrape together enough to pay the electric bill and maybe send a little back home to his mama. He'd already dropped off a businessman at a downtown hotel, a student couple at a late-night taco stand, and an elderly woman who tipped him $1 and a peppermint candy. Eli didn't mind. He never expected much. He just kept driving. Then the next ping came through. Midtown, pick up at the edge of a luxury condo building where glass glowed like embers in the rain. Eli pulled up to the curb. The doorman gave a nod, then helped an older gentleman into the back seats, all thin, well-dressed, moving a little slower than the world around him. He had silver hair, a cane, and the kind of quiet presence that made people instinctively lower their voices. As he slid into the back, the door thudded shut, and for a moment, silence filled the gardens, almost weighty. The man gave an address somewhere near the River Oaks district, and Eli nodded without speaking. He adjusted the mirror slightly, caught a glimpse of the passenger's reflection, then looked away. But something lingered in the back of his mind. A faint, almost haunting familiarity. The ride began in silence. Rain tapped gently on the windshield. Jazz played low on the radio, the kind that felt like memory rather than music. Eli focused on the road, weaving through wet lanes, blinking back the fog on the glass. But every so often, he glanced up at the mirror. The man wasn't on his phone, wasn't distracted. He stared out the window with eyes that seemed to be searching not for directions, but for something lost long ago. After several blocks, the man spoke, his voice deep, steady, tinged with something bittersweet. "You from around here, son?" Eli nodded. "Originally from Louisiana. Came here for school." "School?" the man asked, turning his gaze forward now, genuinely interested. "University of Houston. Business major." "Ambitious," the man murmured, almost to himself. Then, after a pause, "I once knew someone like that." There was something in his tone that caught Eli off guard. It wasn't small talk. It was ... remembering. They rode, in silence again, but the air felt different now. Thicker somehow. More intimate. Eli couldn't shake the feeling that he knew this voice, or maybe just the feeling behind it. Then quietly the man asked, "Do you believe in fate?" Eli blinked. "Sometimes. Not sure if it believes in me." Though the man chuckled softly, the sound barely audible. "It has a strange way of circling back. Years ago, I almost drowned. Right here in Texas. Some boy pulled me out of the river. Skinny little kid. Never even got his name." Eli froze. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. The rain outside suddenly seemed louder. He glanced at the man in the mirror, really looked this time. The sharp lines of his jaw, the tired, haunted eyes, the faint scar above his right brow. A memory, buried under years of struggle and silence, rose like smoke from a long-forgotten fire. I think I know that story," Eli said slowly. The man tilted his head. "Funny, not many do." Eli hesitated, unsure if it was even real, unsure if he should speak. But something inside him pushed forward. "I was that kid," he said. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was staggered, breathless. The man leaned forward slowly, peering into the rearview mirror, as if trying to confirm what his heart already suspected. "What's your name?" Ailey Booker." The man didn't respond at first. He sat back, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, not in disbelief, but in awe. "My God," he whispered. "It's really you." Neither of them spoke for the rest of the drive, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that needed to be said had just happened in a glance, in a name, in the strange gravity of fate pulling two lives back together after years apart. When they arrived at the destination, the man didn't reach for the door handle. He simply looked at Eli with a softness few people had ever offered him. "Would you come inside? Just for a cup of tea?" Eli hesitated. The house was huge stone pillars, manicured lawns, windows, glowing with warm light. It was everything he'd never known, everything he'd never felt invited into. But something about the man's voice, the way it trembled with unspoken things, made him nod. "All right," Eli said quietly. "Just for a minute." He didn't know yet that stepping through that door wouldn't just reveal the past, it would unravel it, thread by thread. Because the man Eli had saved as a boy was more than a stranger with a story. He was holding a secret that could rewrite everything Eli thought he knew about his own. The house smelled like cedar, an old book swarm, lived in quiet in a way that didn't feel empty, just preserved. Eli stepped inside cautiously, his shoes squeaking slightly on the polished wood floor. The lights were soft, golden, casting shadows on walls lined with shelves and memories. Mr. Richard closed the door behind them, his cane tapping lightly as he moved. "Make yourself at home," he said gently, motioning toward a wide sitting room with a fireplace flickering low and steady. On the mantel sat framed photos, some faded with time, some crisp and recent, the kind of room that held its breath when someone new entered, waiting to see if they belonged. Eli didn't sit. His eyes wandered, drawn to the photos without knowing why. There were black and white portraits in brass frames, handshakes with mayors, blurry beach shots, and one image that made him stop cold. On a corner shelf, simple wood, tucked beneath a small lamp sat a picture in a silver frame. A woman, not young, but not yet old. Dark hair, eyes that were kind in a way that stung, and a soft, familiar smile that Eli hadn't seen captured in years. He stepped closer, slowly, the rest of the room fading. His hand trembled as he reached toward the frame. That wasn't just any woman. That was his mother. The silence in the room shifted, thickened. Mr. Richard, who had been pouring tea into delicate china cups, looked up and saw where Eli was standing. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched the boyno, the young man, stare into a piece of his past. Eli turned, his voice a rough whisper. "Where did you get this?" Mr. Richard came closer, his eyes softening. "That's Ruth," he said quietly. "I knew her. A long time ago. She was the love of my life." The words hit Eli like a wave. Not because they were poetic, but because they were true. Everything in him screamed to ask the question. To put voice to the thunder suddenly rumbling in his chest. But the only word that came out was, "How?" Richard lowered himself into a chair, his eyes never leaving the photo. "We met in Louisiana. I was young, arrogant, trying to escape my family's expectations. She was everything I wasn't. Grounded, gentle, real." His voice trailed off. He took a breath, as if trying to inhale time. "They didn't want me with her," he said. "Said she wasn't right for someone with our name. So they sent me overseas for school. I wrote her letters every day, but none of them came back. I thought she gave up on me. I came back years later, and she was gone. No trace. Like she vanished." Eli's mouth was dry, his palms cold. She hadn't vanished. She'd been home, raising a child, raising him. He sat down, the edges of the chair biting into his back, like reality trying to keep him upright. "Mr. Richard," Eli said carefully, his throat tight. "How long ago was that?" Richard's brow furrowed, as if the dates were stitched into his skin. "More than 20 years. She'd be what? In her late 40s now." "She's 51. Eli replied. There was a pause. Heavy, long. Richard looked up slowly, his eyes locking with Eli's. "You said your last name was Booker." Eli nodded. "And your mother is Ruth Booker." "Ruth Simmons," Eli said. "She never married. Booker was her mother's name." Richard sat back, stunned. A slow, dawning expression moved across his face. Not horror, not fear, something deeper. A recognition trying to push past disbelief. He whispered, "How old are you?" 22. Another silence. This one complete. Then, something changed in Richard's face. Something quiet and seismic. He stood slowly, carefully, and crossed the room to sit beside Eli. He didn't speak for a long while. The fireplace crackled. Then, finally, "I think I know why she disappeared." Eli turned to him. His voice was barely audible. "What do you mean?" "I think she was trying to protect you. From my family. From what they might have done. From the life I couldn't promise." The room seemed to pull inward, gravity bending around the space between them. "Eli," Richard said. The name waited now, with everything unsaid. "Do you think it's possible that I'm your father?" Eli didn't answer. He didn't know how. The idea wasn't foreign. It had been whispering ever since he saw that photo, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. He stood, backed away slightly, then stopped. "She never told me," he said. "Not once. I asked her about my father growing up. She'd just smile and say I had her. That was enough." Richard nodded slowly, pain flickering behind his eyes. "I don't blame her." Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. Because some truths don't need confirmation, they just sit there, fully formed, waiting to be believed. "I need to see her," Richard said finally, his voice trembling for the first time. "Please. I need to look her in the eyes and ask why." Eli took a long breath. The air in the room was dense with memory and possibility. And somewhere inside him, beneath the questions, beneath the caution, he knew what needed to happen next. "I'll take you," he said. The words were simple, but behind them lay a storm 20 years in the making. And as they rose from the living room and stepped back into the rain, neither of them spoke again. Because the road they were about to travel was paved in silence, soaked in memory and waiting. At the end of it was the one woman who held the key to everything. The past wasn't just back, it was knocking. The next morning, the sky over Willow Creek was the kind of gray that felt personal, like even the clouds were holding their breath. Eli hadn't been back in nearly a year. The streets were the same, but somehow smaller. The old oaks still lined Maple Avenue, heavy with moss, their branches arching over the road like they remembered too much. The car moved slowly past, neighbors sweeping porches, and kids on rusted bikes. Richard sat in the passenger seat, silent, staring at every house like it might be the one. His hands trembled slightly in his lap, not from age, but from everything that hadn't been said for 22 years. When they pulled into the driveway, Ruth was already on the porch. She stood with her arms crossed, apron still tied around her waist, as if she'd just stepped out to shake a rug, and found history pulling up to her door. Eli stepped out first. "Mama," he said softly. "There's someone you need to see." Ruth looked past him, and froze. Her breath caught, and for a moment, she didn't move, not even to blink. Richard stepped out, slowly, leaning on his cane like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "Ruth," he said. Her name came out like a memory. Fragile, precious. She didn't answer. She just stared at him, at the face she hadn't seen since she was 29, at the man who had loved her once, then vanished without a trace. "You shouldn't have come," she said finally, her voice tight, barely above a whisper. "I had to," Richard replied. "I didn't know. Not until now." Ruth looked at Eli. Her eyes weren't angry, but they weren't soft either. They were searching. "You told him?" she asked. "No," Eli said. "He figured it out. I found your photo in his house." Her shoulders lowered just a little. A breath released, heavy as rain. For a long time, no one spoke. The air buzzed with everything unspoken. And then, quietly, Ruth stepped aside and motioned them in. The living room was just as Eli had remembered it, neat, modest, filled with the scent of lemon polish and lavender. Richard sat on the worn couch across from Ruth. Eli stood between them, unsure whether to bridge the silence or let it stand. Ruth was the first to break it. "You want to know why I left?" she said. Richard nodded. "I didn't," she said. "You were gone. And then the letters stopped. I thought you chose them. That you changed your mind." His eyes widened. "Ruth, I never stopped writing. My parents, my father, he must have. I know that now," she whispered. "But back then, I was alone, pregnant, and too proud to chase someone who didn't chase me back." Richard looked down, his hands clasped. "I failed you. I should have come anyway." "You were 22, Ruth said. "So was I. We did what scared people do. We waited too long." A long silence passed between them. Then Richard looked up. "Why didn't you tell him about me?" "I wanted to," Ruth said. "Every time he asked. But what would I say? That his father was a rich man who disappeared. That love wasn't strong enough to fight money." She wiped her hands on her apron. "So I gave him what I could. I gave him me." Richard's voice cracked. "I want to give him something too. Even if it's just time." Ruth's gaze softened, not with forgiveness, but with the weight of understanding. The kind that only comes when the pain is no longer fresh, but still sharp in certain corners of the soul. "I don't know what kind of father you can be now," she said, "but I know he's a good man, because he grew up with nothing but found a way to become everything." Eli hadn't spoken. He stood like a witness in a courtroom built from memory. Now he looked at them both. "I don't need anyone to fix the past," he said. "I just want to know it didn't all happen for nothing." Richard reached out slowly, unsure, and placed a hand on Eli's arm. "I want to earn the right to be part of your life," he said. "Not as some ghost from your mother's photo, but as your father, if you'll let me." Eli didn't move at first. Then, after what felt like a lifetime, he nodded once. It wasn't a full embrace. Not yet. But it was enough. Enough to open the door to something new, not a redo, but a beginning built on truth. Later that afternoon, the three of them sat at the old kitchen table. Ruth made sweet tea. Richard told stories. Eli listened, laughed, and occasionally just sat there, letting the moment sink into his bones. Some families are born, others are rebuilt, but the ones that survive are the ones that choose each other even after the years have stolen so much. And though the scars of absence would never fully vanish, something deeper had taken root between them, a healing that stretched across time, and just beyond that healing was something none of them expected, an invitation into a future where love didn't come with expiration dates, where roots, though buried, could still bloom again. And tomorrow would ask them all a different kind of question. Now that they had found each other, what were they going to build? Fall came slowly to Houston, brushing the air with just enough chill to make the leaves turn golden at the edges. On campus, students shuffled through piles of homework and midterms, but Eli walked with a different weight and a different lightness. Something had changed in him. Not because life had become easy, but because, for the first time, he knew where he came from, and more importantly, he knew he wasn't walking alone. Richard had kept his promise. He didn't storm into Eli's life waving titles or wealth. He didn't ask to be dad overnight. Instead, he showed up quietly, consistently. A lunch here, a phone call there, a ride to work when the bus broke down, a care package left outside the dorm with soup, socks, and a note that simply said, "Proud of you." Eli, cautious by nature, didn't rush the process. But he noticed the difference. In the way Richard listened. In the way Ruth, once wary, began asking how he was doing when Eli visited home. The sharp edges between them slowly dulled, not erased, but softened by effort. One afternoon, Richard invited Eli to his company, not for a position, just a tour. The building was tall, sleek, full of suits and polished shoes. Eli felt out of place at first, still wearing his usual button-downs and scuffed boots. But Richard introduced him proudly, not as a visitor, but as someone who belonged. Weeks passed, then months. Eventually, Richard offered him an internship, not in a corner office, but in the operations department, starting from the ground up, learning the systems, the staff, the grind behind the glass. Eli said yes. He showed up early, left late, asked questions, took notes. He never mentioned who his father was, never used the name like a key. The only thing that opened doors for Eli was work, the kind that made hands tired and minds sharp. There was something poetic about it. The boy who once couldn't afford lunch, now reviewing vendor contracts. The kid who washed dishes, now managing supply orders. The young man who once saved a life without a name, now building one with quiet purpose. At night, he still studied, still sent money to Ruth, still rode the bus some days, not out of necessity, but habit. He didn't want to forget where he started. Because roots, once reclaimed, aren't meant to be hidden. They're meant to anchor you. One evening, after a long shift and a longer commute, Eli arrived at Richard's home for dinner. Ruth was already there, her hands folded over a warm cup of tea. The house felt different, now less like a museum, more like a place people lived in again. Photos had been rearranged. One new one sat on the mantel, Eli in his work badge, smiling awkwardly. Below it, in Richard's handwriting, were the words, "Legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's who we stand beside." They ate together in a room that had once been thick with memory and now pulsed with second chances. Laughter came easier. The silences were comfortable. After the plates were cleared and the evening settled, Eli stood up. He looked at Richard, then at Ruth. Something in his chest pulled tight, like a string finally ready to be tied. "I think I'm ready," he said quietly. Richard tilted his head. "For what?" Eli looked him in the eye. "To call you Dad." The word landed like soft thunder, loud, not in volume, but in meaning. Richard's eyes welled up. Ruth smiled, her hand gently covering her mouth. No one clapped. No one needed to, because some moments don't need applause, they just need truth. That fall, Eli moved into a modest apartment not far from campus. He kept his internship, finished his degree, and began laying the bricks of a future no one had handed him but one he had built. Piece by piece. And when graduation day finally arrived, he didn't walk across the stage alone. In the front row sat Ruth, her hands clasped, her smile proud. Beside her was Richard, wearing a navy suit and eyes that shimmered like the Mississippi on that long-ago day. When Eli's name was called, they stood together. He accepted his diploma with both hands, but the weight he felt wasn't from the paper, it was from the journey, from the riverbank, from the nights hungry, the hours working, the silence endured, from the boy he had been, and the man he had become. Years later, when Eli took over as operations director for the company, people asked him about his success, about luck, about fate. He'd smile and say, "I don't know much about fate, but I know this: if you plant good seeds, even in broken soil, something will grow." And when he visited Willow Creek, driving through the quiet streets with his own child in the back seat, he'd point to that old levee by the river. That, he'd say, is where everything changed. Not because he found a father, but because he learned that family is not just about blood. It's about choice, about love that reaches back, even when time tries to keep it apart. And when roots are finally reclaimed, they don't just hold you steady, they let you bloom.